Okay, so these are the slides that Emily normally reviews quickly, and I'm not going to try to do that. What I'll do is just cycle through here, and I am the second last one here. It's March 6th, and I will be discussing. Yeah, so I'll just start. So I'm going to be discussing a project that I'm working on with my company Ecostrat that centers around Ashtabula County and trying to get developers to move in and make use of Miscanthus cropland that has been what was established in 2011 through roughly to 2014. So the company I work for, Ecostrat, is a biomass advisory group. So we work on biomass supply chain projects throughout North America in the private and public sectors, and we determine how much material could be available for new or existing projects, what the price point would be for a developer to have that material delivered to a facility, and then we often also determine the risk profile associated with the supply chain. So if there's any red flags as to how the project might not work out. So we are most of you probably already know that there was a Miscanthus supply chain established in this area. We're looking at north to Lake Erie of Ashtabula County, and a lot of the Miscanthus cropland was planted in close proximity to Ashtabula, which is just below the N in Miscanthus here. And things were working well for a number of years. A company by the name of Alaterra was producing compostable packaging and an absorptant product. But eventually the company declared bankruptcy. And so we're working with the growth partnership for Ashtabula County to try and get developer back into the area to make use of the Miscanthus and ideally to establish more. So this is a great opportunity. I've been attending most of the webinars. I've learned a lot. This is our first project centered around Miscanthus. So what we're working on here is it's referred to as a risk rating, so a bioeconomy development opportunity zone risk rating, a BDO zone rating. So what I'll do in this talk is give a quick. Let me just do something here. I'm going to give a quick overview of what exactly a BDO zone rating is. These have been established throughout North America, and again, this is our first dedicated biomass crop that we've been working with. Then I'll move into a brief history of Miscanthus production in Ashtabula, and then I'll follow with a summary of the BDO zone rating. So it's still in the preliminary stages, not complete yet, but we do have an assessment of the rated quantity, the amount that we're going to be rating for new projects, and what we expect the price would be. So again, this is a great opportunity, and I'm going to try and move through this within 35 minutes so that we can have a group discussion, see if some of the assumptions I'm using are correct or not. So what is a BDO zone rating? So this is a typical front page of a BDO zone rating, and we translate essentially an assessment of the risk profile for a biomass supply in a given region. We translate that into an alphanumeric rating, much like credit rating agencies do for companies or for infrastructure. We do this for supply chains. And this is a way to send signals to developers as to regions where they might be able to set up and produce bioproducts or bioenergy, what have you. So it's technology agnostic. We're just focused on making clear to readers and to developers what the prospects are, what are the assets, what are the liabilities. In completing a BDO zone, we have to do essentially three things. We determine what we refer to as the rated quantity, how much biomass could be available. So this is an example from Kemper County, Mississippi, and we're looking at a center point of a town by the name of Scuba, and to determine the rated quantity, we get an assessment of how much biomass is produced within that red area, which is defined by a 75-mile drive distance from the center point. And then we have to determine the rated price. What will it cost, or what will the price be delivered to a developer that's looking to set up within the BDO zone, that 25-mile yellow area there. And then we use these standardized risk indicators to get a sense of what the risk profile is like, and what are the relative assets and liabilities for a developer looking to set up and make use of the quantities at that price range. So the standards were developed in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Energy, and 65-member committee of experts in the field of biomass supply and biomanufacturing. And there's 88 risk indicators, so they're related to attributes of potential suppliers for a new project, potential competitors to a new project, and other factors related to equipment, weather, and so on. So the standards have become an official national standard in Canada, and we expect the same to occur in the US by the end of this year under the ASTM. So this is a map showing the standards that were, the ratings that were issued or that were pending in 2024. And again, we're converting the risk score to an alphanumeric rating, and we are all of the regions are, of course, evaluated using the same standardized set of indicators and the same methodology, so it allows for comparability across different regions. And the difference, of course, being in many cases in the feedstock that is utilized. We're usually involved in conventional forestry or conventional agriculture, like, for example, corn stover. And now this is our first example of working on a project involving a dedicated biomass crop. So these ratings are then promoted. So we have webinars, and we connect the communities or local governments or companies that are involved in setting these BDO zones up with potential developers or investors. And the idea is that it makes it more likely that investment occurs. And we've had some success in the U.S. South with this. This is only about a 2-year-old program now, so we expect to be continuing to have some success moving forward into 2025. So just to give a few examples of a typical BDO zone rating and how it's going to compare to a Miscanthus BDO zone rating, because as we know, there's a scale difference here when you're dealing with Miscanthus, and I'll just make that clear just briefly here. So this is a rating for Lewis County, Washington, for conventional forestry feedstocks like low-grade roundwood or pulpwood, forest residue, and sawmill residuals. So we're rating a total quantity of 600,000 dry tons, which is well over 1 million tons as is. And the rated price range is from 25 to 100. You can procure sawmill residuals quite cheaply, but generally you're up around the $75 to $100 mark for material that you have to recover from active forest operations. And liabilities here, this is a rare AA rating. This is the higher end of the ratings. And the liabilities just have to do with the fact that diesel prices are higher on the West Coast, and that there's still a pulp and paper industry that it's declining, but there's still a sufficient number of facilities to pose a risk to new developers. So that's one example. And then here we have a conventional agricultural BDO zone in Falls City, Nebraska. A similar quantity is rated at 600 dry tons of essentially square baled stover. And this is a higher price range, so 95 to 115 delivered to a developer within the vicinity of Falls City. And this is just to get a sense of the scale we're dealing with here with conventional crops. We're rating 600,000 dry tons, which is equivalent to 150,000 acres, which is less than 10% of the total acreage within that red area there, the supply zone. So it's a huge potential in these areas for things like liquid biofuels and other scale-dependent biomanufacturing or biofuel-related end products. Liabilities here relate to the scale-ups of you're going to have a lot of investment in square baling units, and you're going to have to deal with the feedstock quality control. It's never been proven at scale. And you're going to have to make sure you're not interfering with combine harvesting of corn grains. So there's in bad years, you're going to have less than 50 days to get the material processed into bale form and have it at roadside ready to send to a facility. So, and that moves us into the Ashtabula County BDOs. And so again, it's an incomplete front page, but I do have the rated quantity of 15,000 dry tons. So that compare that to 600,000 dry tons. And the price range, of course, is elevated because you you have to deal with the cost of establishing the crop. And unlike conventional forestry, at least, you can't share the harvesting cost with the primary products. It's all borne by the individual, the company is going to be using the miscanthus. So there's some assets here. The miscanthus happens to be planted. The miscanthus that's still established in the area happens to be planted close to a potential product development site in the city of Ashtabula. And there's virtually no competition, which is very rare in a BDO zone. But we have liabilities related to land ownership, where you're going to have to convince landowners to get on board with another miscanthus project, which didn't work out in the past. And there's weather and other factors. So I'll get into that later if I have time. But I just wanted to give a quick overview now of the history of miscanthus in Ashtabula County, and this history owes basically everything to David Marison, who was kind enough to share pictures from the operations and a PowerPoint he had prepared when Alaterra was operating. So I've broken it up into three phases. We have the crop establishment phase, where a company by the name of Alaterra establishes 4,500 acres of miscanthus in Ashtabula County and surrounding counties under the Biomass Crop Assistance Program funding. Approximately 100 landowners agree to lease land. So I can't get a good number on the number of landowners, but this is my best estimate given interviews with local experts. Then the second phase, we have peak production. So they attempted baling initially, but it didn't work. And so they resorted to a silage harvesting technique using choppers and wagons. And it worked out. And they reached a peak production of 15,000 tons, or roughly 13,000 dry tons. And they had a compostable container production line and an absorbent product production line. Over 50 employees. It was impressive. They were selling to Chipotle. But eventually the company declared bankruptcy in 2020, and that brings me to the third phase, where you actually have large scale removal of the planted miscanthus cropland. So the best estimate currently is that 2,500 acres remains. So to make this happen, it took a lot of work. You had, of course, the BCAP funding, but you also had to have a number of consultations with landowners to convince them to agree to lease their land and to get the contract right. Rhizomes were sourced, I believe, through Agritech. I'm not sure on that, so I have a question mark. That's something we can maybe resolve in the discussion. Approximately, again, 4,500 acres are planted. It's a complicated process. You have to use refrigeration trucks, so and you have multiple sites, of course. But they made it work. And initially, this is in 2011, so the sort of 8-row planters that Agrotech is currently using were not available. They actually began manually planting, and then they quickly developed a 2-row planter that was engineered from scratch, to my understanding. And it worked out, but survival was not optimal, and it may have had a lot to do with just trying to learning through doing and getting that planted without having the know-how before doing so. The yields are lower. This is in the snow belt of northeastern Ohio, so yields are roughly 4.5 dry tons an acre, or 5 tons an acre. You can compare that to further south in Iowa, where it's more like 7.5 dry tons an acre. So still something that was made use of, and it worked out economically for some time. So peak production. You initially had an attempt to cut and bale, so they were windrowing, and then they had a baling tractor and a baling unit, both with tires, And the problem was that the cut Miscanthus stems in the winter were frozen and they were causing the tires to puncture. And in addition to that, you had the heavy snowfall leading to excessive moisture content in the bales. So they decided to switch to a heavy duty class chopper that was brought in from New York State. And this worked out for them. They minimize contact of the miscanthus with the ground so that you eliminate the moisture content problem. And the machine was tracked, so you eliminate the pokey miscanthus stem problem. So it worked out, and they're loading directly into wagons. You have a very low bulk density with miscanthus compared to silage. It's less than half of the bulk density of silage, to my understanding, but it still worked out, and they were able to have that put in temporary storage and then loaded onto a truck. And it was the quality control was there. It was about 2 to 3 inch particle size, and that was sent to a facility where they were producing in Ashtabula. They were producing the compostable containers, an impressive establishment, and they were also marketing the material, the miscanthus, which they still do today to some extent, for as an absorbent. And they do a good job of advertising here, not only in the name Sludge Warrior, but in making clear to the reader the absorption properties of this compared to a traditional, wood fiber based absorbent. But things didn't work out in the long term, and that had to do with all sorts of reasons that I'm still not totally clear on. But the landowners basically were left having to deal with miscanthus that wasn't being harvested, and they were now liable to pay a tax because the crop wasn't being harvested year to year, and they had to remove it, which is expensive if they wanted to decided to remove it. So now we have about 2,500 acres remaining of the original 4,500 acres. So that's a quick overview of the history. And that leads me to the Ashtabula County BDO zone. So this is funded through the Rural Business Development Grant Program, and it's being completed in partnership with the Growth Partnership for Ashtabula County. The project started in November 2024, and we expect the rating to be complete by the second quarter of this year. And again, we're looking at determining the rated quantity for a new project, the rated price, and then assessing the risk using those indicators. And this map is showing what it looks like. Most of the miscanthus, again, is located within that, within 30 miles of the city of Ashtabula. And we expect that a developer is going to be, if they going to be planting additional miscanthus in that area to minimize transportation costs. So we're left with a rated quantity of 15,000 dry tons. So we assume a developer again is going to plant is going to double the acreage over a scale of period of 5 years. Excuse me. This results in a total production of 22,500 dry tons, and we assume over a period of 20 years. Now, arguably, this could be extended further with nitrogen and maybe other fertilizer input. It's a big unknown. Miscanthus is an early stage feedstock, but we're assuming over a 20-year period here. And the developer, if we assume that they'll succeed in getting this additional cropland, if they have if the business model is working, if they're profitable, and they're paying the right price to lease the land. So we expect that a developer would require 2 choppers to make sure that quantity is delivered. A single chopper, we assume, is going to have 10,000 dry ton per year productivity based on those assumptions. And you could technically produce more than that if you have 2 choppers, but we're just being careful in the amount we rate for a new project, because lots can go wrong. There's a weather factor. There's some of the miscanthus is not going to take, and there's all the operational hiccups that can occur in a given harvesting season. So the rated price. So this is significantly elevated compared to other feedstocks. So we have an estimate of 150 to 175, and that includes everything, including the establishment costs annualized over a 20-year period, and biennial nitrogen fertilization. And it's difficult to get a sort of a cost component estimate of each supply chain phase. So instead, I've relied on two independent sources that were familiar with Alitair's operations, who could give me a range of the estimated delivered cost, which includes harvesting and transport. So there's a way to, if you know that the transportation is going to be within 30 miles, you can say, well, chopping and storage is going to be in that range roughly. And so the question is, why is it so much more expensive? I think we already know the answer. It's because machine utilization is going to be very low compared to a typical, say, a corn stover based supply chain where the acreages are larger and they're more or less contiguous. Whereas in this case, this is showing a map of excuse me, of the location of Miscanthus crops that were scheduled for harvesting under Alitair in 2016, 2017, and they're distributed in space. And they did a good job of trying to concentrate them around the city of Ashtabula, but they're still distributed. And you have a lot of downtime with the machines moving from parcel to parcel along roadways during scheduled work hours. So in many cases, you're going to have less than 50% of a working day. They're going to be commuting or setting up rather than productively harvesting Miscanthus. So that leads to elevated costs. The only way to resolve that is to try to maintain a contiguous block where you're having the Miscanthus planted, and ideally having as large an acreage as possible. My impression is that a lot of the plots here are less than 20 acres. So that all leads to more machine movement. So this is just a quick overview of a preliminary risk profile showing the risk indicators that score the highest. And so ownership of land, of course, is the highest. A developer's going to have to convince landowners in the region to buy into this again and to plant additional Miscanthus. And then they're going to have to invest in another chopper. The original machine was brought in from New York State. That has a cost in itself, just bringing it in. And so there's all these questions about whether they're going to be able to, or someone's going to be able to pay for that. And then there's other indicators here. And I think if there's any questions about the indicators, I'm happy to address those later. But I think I'll stop there. This is, under 30 minutes, which is what I was aiming for. So this is showing, again, this is the map of the BDO I showed earlier. So thank you. If anyone has any interest in looking at the ratings, getting a sense of what we've been doing over the last couple of years, there's a link. If you have any questions, please reach out. If you have any ideas as to where a BDO zone using Miscanthus or another dedicated biomass crop might have a lower cost and maybe a lower risk, I'd be happy to talk. And special thanks to John, David, Nicholas, Andy, and Emily. This is the information that you've provided has made this possible. So with that, thank you. And any questions or group discussion, please. Get my video back on.
So, Peter, that's a very interesting talk. I really appreciate it. That location, and I would expect to be a pretty good location for growing the standard clone of Miscanthus, because that lake effect snow would insulate the rhizomes and prevent them from having winter kill and winter damage. And actually, even a little bit, further south where there is not that lake effect snow could be actually a worse environment. From the photos, it looked like there were a lot of skips in some of those fields, and I would likely would have attributed that to just planting effects, establishment issues. But if you could speak to that, and maybe I've got it wrong, but I'm curious what your perspective is.
Yeah, so I would resort to David Marison. He's the expert on this. So I should have clarified earlier, when we write up these ratings, we rely heavily on outreach to local experts to get a sense of what's been going on and what the potentials are. And so your understanding is that it had to do with the planning and efficiency above all else.
or
I think that,
conditions after planting. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that was David's takeaway as well, from what I recall, is that yeah, yeah,
So Emily asked if I could moderate.
yeah.
So one thing about the planting, Emily did clarify in the chat that the Alloterra miscanthus was planted with in-house resources led by Richard Smith and Rich Piter. And the material was UIUC material, propagated by Speedling Incorporated in Florida, which is a propagation company that we used to work with. So those were probably planted with living plants then, like transplants potentially a
I
lot.
remember the Speedling materials. They were very small plugs. They were like
Mhm.
288 or 512 cell tray plugs. And so they would have been very prone to any drought immediately after planting in the first few months, actually. So that probably was a major issue.
Yeah, my understanding is the rhizomes were planted, but maybe you're saying that they may have been a more advanced stage of development. Um,
Well, they were very, if it was Speedling, they were very small live plants that
Mhm.
were grown in plug trays, very high density small cell plug trays. Either they were either 288s or 512, I don't remember, but they were very tiny. And they were pulled out of the trays and boxed up and put in a bag. And then they were probably directly transplanted, is my guess. Because I got stuff from Speedling, so I remember what those looked like. They were very tiny.
I could add to
Andy?
Eric's thought process there too. This is Andy. The drought issue probably is one to think about, Eric, because the soils around there are really, really high in clay content.
Uh,
And so either they're poorly drained, so either some standing water could have killed those little baby plants very easily, or if it was dry afterwards, the limited
yeah,
water availability could have dried up. It's a
there was
tough,
a
that's a tough soil.
there was a drought in 2012.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah,
so that had a lot to
severe.
do with
Yep,
it.
yep.
I just posted a picture of the Speedling plugs. I also did a lot of stuff with Speedling when I was doing my PhD because I was studying stem propagation, and that was something Speedling was trying. Emily said she's 80% sure of the accuracy of the information about the planting, but they also had rhizome planting as well. So I bet over what you said, a 3-year period of establishment, they probably messed around with a little bit of both, I would
Yeah,
guess.
I think they settled on the rhizomes, but maybe initially they were using the those plugs. Yeah,
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 that'd be my guess.
Yeah, that picture you sent, that's much bigger than what they sent me. I used to get these really tiny things.
Yeah, I was gonna say like it depended on the shipment, I feel like. Sometimes they were different than others. This picture is taken in their own greenhouse. This is taken at Speedling. Um, so yeah, I think it was dependent on, the lot that you got. So yeah. So anybody else want to jump in? Because I'm supposed to moderate, so I feel like I have a duty to ask more questions, follow-ups.
I have a question too, Nick, but you can go first.
Oh, okay. Um, so I was just curious with the rating system. You're working on sort of a semi-theoretical one now in Ashtabula. Um, but I was curious if the way that you do the rating, if you need plants to already be on the ground, or if basically all aspects of the process you can simulate, for lack of a better word, like you can just tell it what's going to happen there. And then I guess as sort of a follow-up to that, which parts of the process seem to be the most sensitive to impacting the rating?
yeah. Well, that second question, it depends on the situation, on the region we're looking at, and the feedstock. Um, and the first question, I'm not quite clear. You're saying, what was the first question again? Just to be clear.
So if you like, so your Ashtabula assessment, you have a known acreage, but
Yeah,
you probably, I mean, you basically insinuated, if this is what the rating would be if you added 2,500 acres. I was
right.
just curious if the system you have in place for outputting the rating, if you could go to a completely theoretical region, and just assume certain yields and
Oh,
acreages and markets and how that
Yeah, I mean, we're dabbling in that. So I mean, with this BDO zone, it's the first time we're having to establish dedicated crops, make that
Mhm.
assumption. It's entirely foreseeable, but it will increase the risk profile inevitably, and that's what we're finding here. We could have just rated based on that 2,500 acres, and we considered that, and that would you'd have a more favorable rating, but you'd have half the quantity. So it's difficult to market in that respect when you're only working with 7,000 dry tons. So we decided to go with as big as reasonably possible.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I cut off Andy. Andy, do you want to
Yep,
ask a question?
I can go now too. And Peter, it went by a little fast. In terms of this year, are any of those bioproducts being made in locally in Ashtabula, or is that all shut down with the bankruptcy situation?
Yes, it all shut down in early 2020, with the exception of the absorbent bagging line. There's still small, like let's say 700 tons a year being produced. So it's very and that company is looking to move elsewhere. Yeah.
And are they using like material from previous harvests, or are they using this more recent harvest?
I think the last harvest was in 2022 or 2023. So yeah,
Okay, gotcha. Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, it's just not worth moving the chopper in anymore.
Yeah.
There isn't enough of demand.
Emily also had another follow-up. She said the BDO seems really helpful. I agree. I feel like with bioenergy crops in general, there's always a chicken and egg scenario. And that's kind of why I was asking the theoretical question, if you could regionally detect maybe a place that would make sense for a simultaneous deployment of crops and processing might be beneficial. But Emily's question is, what are some of the typical questions from investors or banking industry?
Yeah, that I don't know. I've never dealt directly with investors or banks personally as a project director. I would say that we try to answer one of the basic questions, which is how much material is available and what are the risks. So we do that. We try to encapsulate that in the rating, and in the first few pages, we try to distill that down into assets and liabilities and make that clear. But in terms of the broader questions of there's a lot of questions we don't answer with this, like the return on investment when you're making the capital investment and trying to find those end markets. We're strictly focused on the supply chain and signaling to the markets what's available in various regions in North America. So
Let's see. Anybody else have anything? Let me double check the chat.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Eric Run, Central Illinois. What markets were you looking at? I mean, our biggest, we just finished harvesting 40 acres, but it all went in the bag because there are no immediate markets. Our best market before was turkey bedding, but it was such a good deal that turkey grower planted 100 acres of his own miscanthus, and now we're left without a market. And that seems to be the biggest drawback. We pretty much can grow it and handle it. That's not our problem. But my experience has been, and I haven't heard anyone talk about it in the United States much, but as a fuel, we went to Germany. I mean, we planted Germany and Europe 3 different trips, and their best market was fuel. Of course, they're on, their source of energy is a lot different than ours, cost wise, price wise. So that made a big difference. But even keeping that in mind, if you figure the BTU value of a dry town of Miscanthus compared to LP gas, which is what most farms use, areas away from a natural gas pipeline, it's about half the cost just for the fuel itself using Miscanthus over LP. But I've never seen that part developed. taking advantage of that price difference. Have you looked into that? I mean, is that what did you find? Why aren't you doing that in Ohio or in the South where you were?
Yeah,
That was a long question, but
yeah. No, it's tricky. I mean, again, the ratings are designed just to get a sense of the biomass supply opportunity, and then to advertise that to a network of developers and investors. But when we look at Miscanthus, the way like you can look at it from the perspective of Alaterra. They set up in Ashtabula, which has access to ports, and they thought, I think initially they were talking about pellets that were going to be shipped overseas, but there's a scale effect problem. I think one of the reasons would have been just you don't have you can't produce the quantity required to make that work at scale. It may have also had to do with getting a consistent pellet produce. I don't know, but they eventually went to the niche markets, which I think is where Miscanthus would be most likely to work out. You find and I think Travis at Agritech made this clear. You find the high value propositions, and you cater to those markets. You find contracts with potential buyers, and you go from there. And Alaterra did that. They had contracts with Chipotle. They did it, and it worked for 3, 4, 5 years. I'm not exactly sure the duration. They were selling the containers, but eventually, either it was a cost thing or it was a product quality thing. I'm not sure, but it didn't work out. But I think if it's not the high value like niche markets, then it's the absorbency properties of Miscanthus. If that's true, that sludge warrior advertisement we saw there, 3 times as absorbent as the alternatives, then you can sell it at a premium. So yeah, it's complicated, and especially for Miscanthus, it's very difficult to, like with conventional forestry, you have the scale to produce liquid fuels conceivably, and it's the same with corn stover. With Miscanthus, you don't have those economies of scale. If that helps, to answer the question.
yeah, I understand what you're saying, but Miscanthus has the advantage of small scale operation. Back to your chicken and egg thing, what are you going to plant Miscanthus and then develop a market or vice versa? But if you start small, have 40 acres of Miscanthus, you can grow enough Miscanthus for better than 1,000 BTU furnace to operate that, and just go slow. You don't need to depend on some large market somewhere making fuel or whatever. You do it slow. That way your neighbor sees you're successful with it. He's got a need for 20,000 gallons of LP. He'll plant so many acres, and you operate it starting from small and working your way up into a bigger market. Have you given much thought to taking that approach?
I haven't, but it's an interesting way to think of it, is building up in that way. Yeah, but personally, I haven't. No.
You've got you said you had a lot of small 20-acre patches that you were harvesting. That sounds like you got an ideal situation. So one of the turkey growers, for example, we sold Miscanthus to for bedding. He had 2 12,000-gallon LP tanks outside his building. Well, he should have been burning that rather than putting it on the ground, or do both.
Well, when you say, just to clarify, are you saying what are you talking about in tanks?
Propane
Oh,
gas.
okay, right, yeah.
Yeah, liquid propane.
Okay.
Yeah, so here at the energy farm, we have a biomass boiler that we use to produce hot water to heat our greenhouses and drying ovens. So pretty much anywhere you have don't have access to natural gas, but you need to provide some heat. If you can produce your own Miscanthus, you can more economically, if you put the capital cost into the boiler, produce your own energy with reliable and consistent prices long term.
Right.
Yeah, that's the other alternative. Yeah, is the cost savings
No.
approach where you can displace a higher cost fuel. Yep.
It'd be
Mhm.
kind of interesting if you could deploy the rating system on different scales, kind of like what Eric is talking about. Because if you consider a smaller scale of the entire zone, the BDO zone, I mean, maybe you go into niche markets or smaller markets, your total acreage and total supply might not be as detrimental maybe to the rating, I guess, if that makes sense. And I actually I had a question similar to that because you talked about um for the all those 20-acre plots, it sounded like the harvest assumption was excuse me, third party would kind of come in and harvest everything. And like Eric was saying, Miscanthus can be small scale with individual farmers doing some of the work. So I was curious how it might be impacted if in the assessment of the material, the supply chain, if it was sort of assumed that the individual farmers could handle their own 20 acres with like their own uh, baler, for instance. And the supply of the biomass was at the edge of the field waiting and has already been handled by the individual growers. I could just see that as a opportunity, especially in Northwest Iowa, where we're starting to have a bedding market. And I'm thinking, and like you said, large tracts of land are beneficial to the rating. It's going to be hard sometimes to also what you showed was the convincing landowners to grow it because the opportunity cost on their land is really high on large tracts, especially. So if the model could consider other harvesting techniques, I think that'd be informative.
Yeah,
Of
that's
all,
interesting. Yeah.
of all the problems we had growing, harvest has been in the last 18 years, I guess, since we've had miscanthus. That's been the least of our problems because, and maybe if we're an exception, but we've got fellow around who harvests silage and haylage and so forth in the warm months, but his machine's setting idle during the winter months, and he's happy to get it out and chop our miscanthus and the University of Illinois miscanthus as far as that goes, and several other growers around. So that's been not a problem in our situation.
Correct. Eric, you just kind of hit on what I was going to add here is that I think one of the ways we really promote, I guess, getting rid of the risk is we don't have to own the machinery, and we bring value to local contractor farmers who are, like you said, their equipment sitting idle. We don't have to own it. We don't have to maintain it. We lose a little bit of flexibility. In fact, we don't control that step, but I think we'll both say that it's always, like you said, for Eric said 18 years, whatever, but for the time we've been working with this model, it's worked out really well for us and keeps us from owning and storing and depreciating very expensive equipment.
It helps that you and I get along well too, Tim, and share when it's raining. Raining here, and anyway, we get along.
So far, yep, we do a good job.
So far, yeah, so far.
Yeah, I think it could be a mixture too. It depends on the grower, I think. Because I've like I said, I was thinking about Northwest Iowa. The farmers around there may not, I don't know, just the personality of the people there. They like to do their own work too. You know what I mean? They don't like the idea of necessarily hiring someone to come in and do the work for them. So, if it can be flexible, you know, you can maybe adjust like a ratio of a certain number of acres are going to be harvested in a certain way and another portion will be harvested by a management company. I think that would be probably a realistic scenario. So,
Yeah.
well, I think usually Emily tries to wrap things up around 10 till or so. So, I think Emily had one more thing. Agricil planted in Ohio too. That's who I worked with at Speedling. No need to mention it. Oh, that's a DM. My bad, Emily. So Agricil is another company that probably helped with the planting. Like we established, like 3 years of trying to establish it. You're trying to plant it however you can at some point, right?
Yeah.
So, thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. I think this information is super interesting. I'm curious to learn more. Probably follow up with you directly, but I also
Great.
want to just say some thank yous since I think it kind of got passed over at the beginning, but really thankful to Cabby and the Department of Energy and USDA and iRegen at University of Illinois for making this webinar series possible. And next week, same time, same place, we're going to hear from, let me just verify this one more time. We're going to hear from Bill Belden next week. So tune in for that to hear about switchgrass in Iowa. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your week. And we'll talk to you all later. Thanks.